There's one thing that is absolutely certain that I want to remind you of today, and I don't know if you can see it. God is with you right now. He has always been with you. He's been trying to get your attention and grow you and direct you and lead your life since before you were born. Since the moment of your conception, he has been with you. Can you see him? Can you see him? There's a moment at the end of the text we're going to look at today where Jacob says, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I didn't realize it." That is all of us almost all the time. God is good. We're in a series right now in the book of Genesis, which is amazing. The book of Genesis twists my mind into knots and also excites me and helps me to see what God is doing in the world. During this series, at the beginning of each message, we're doing a little piece that has to do with creation and science and the Bible, right? Because the beginning of Genesis is the creation of the world. Some of these I've been introducing you to people. Like a couple of weeks ago, we introduced you to Dr. James Tour. Does anybody remember that introduction? That was cool. Dr. Tour is amazing. So today I'm going to introduce you to somebody else for the illustration. And today, I wonder how many of you guys have heard of this person. I hope it's a lot. It might be almost no one. But this is Dr. Stephen C. Meyer. Who knows Dr. Stephen Meyer? Who's heard of that guy before? Okay. So he has his PhD in the philosophy of science from Cambridge. He has a number of other degrees as well. And he currently works actually not too far from here. He's down in Seattle at a place called the Discovery Institute. And he is one of the most outspoken, most well-known proponents of intelligent design as a scientific theory. Not as something that's based on the Bible necessarily, but as a scientific theory to explain the current state of the universe and the current state of biological life. Okay? So he has, his story is interesting. He was a practicing scientist. He was a geologist, actually, and he published a paper in a well-respected scientific journal that pretty much argued for intelligent design as the best explanation of what we see in the natural world. And because of that, his career was just assassinated by so many different people. He has had vitriol, hatred thrown at him. One of the things I'm impressed about him, by him, is that he is, if you listen to him speak, he is a happy person. Even though he has been attacked, personal attacks, just over and over and over again for decades at this point. But he's fantastic. He's written a number of books. So this one, it was his first really big book. It's called Signature in the Cell. A highly recommended book. All of his top 3 books that he's written are all New York Times bestsellers. So he's very well, people read his books a lot. They're very well written. This book basically argues about how what we know now about what is in a human cell or in any living cell, it's really evidence that the information that's in those cells, because there's actually tons of information. That's what DNA is. You'll hear him talk about that in just a minute. DNA contains information. And the only source we know of for information in our experience is a mind. A mind. Information doesn't come from the natural world. It doesn't come from just the physical world. It comes from a mind. This is another book, and part of the reason I'm highlighting him today is we haven't dug in too much to the theory of evolution and whether it is accurate or not. You're going to hear him talk about that a little bit in a video clip in a second. He wrote this book, I don't know, this book's probably about 10 years old now, Darwin's Doubt, actually highlighting the fact that Darwin himself thought that certain things would be discovered. And he says in The Origin of Species, if we don't find certain gaps to fill in the fossil record, then my theory is probably not right. And those 200 years later, we've not filled in those gaps in the fossil record. This book is about a bunch of other stuff as well. Lots of, actually a lot of the theory of evolution as a theory for the origin of species is probably, in my view, from what I can tell, is going to die out in academic circles in the next 20 or 30 years, I think. This is his most recent book, The Return of the God Hypothesis. I haven't read this one yet, but it's got lots of great reviews. Check out his books. Here's a clip from him. He's also been interviewed by really famous people. So I'm going to show you a clip from him on the Joe Rogan Show, which is the most popular podcast in the world. And this is a clip from last summer. Check this out. We got sound ready to go? Let's do it.
Do you believe in evolution?
I believe in microevolution. I believe that there are real evolutionary processes. I'm skeptical about what's called universal common descent, the idea that all living forms have evolved from one single common ancestor. I'm profoundly skeptical about chemical evolution, the idea that the non-living chemicals in a prebiotic ocean or prebiotic soup arrange themselves to form the first living cell. And I'm also skeptical about the creative power of the mutation selection mechanism, which, as it happens, so are many leading evolutionary biologists today. I attended a conference in 2016 at convened by the Royal Society in London, the Royal Society being the oldest and most august scientific body in the world. And it was convened by a group of evolutionary biologists who were essentially dissatisfied with neo-Darwinism, the standard textbook theory that we learn in all high school and college textbooks. And many of them were saying we need a new theory of evolution. The first talk at that conference was given by Gerd Müller, a prominent Austrian evolutionary biologist, and he simply enumerated the 5 major what he called explanatory deficits of neo-Darwinism. And his basic perspective was the mutation selection mechanism does a good job of optimizing or modifying pre-existing forms. It can generate small-scale variation, but it does a very poor job of explaining the origin of those forms. Think about, for example, Darwin's finch beaks. Great job of explaining how variations in weather patterns result in changes in the shape and structure of the finch beaks. But that mechanism turns out not to do a good job of explaining the origin of birds or other major animal groups in the first place. So modification, yes. Innovation, no.
But modification over massive amounts of time, don't you think that would eventually lead to new groups? Because a lot of new groups have similar origins, or at least origins from one ancestor.
Well, time,
like primates.
Yeah, time was always the hero of the plot. But let me just run a couple of arguments by you, and let's see what you think. Okay, and I developed these in a lot of detail in my book, Darwin's Doubt. If we now know, thanks to the genetic revolution, the molecular biological revolution, that if you want to build a new form of life, you have to have new code. So, we have these long digital bit strings of ACs, Gs, and Ts, not zeros and ones, but ACs, Gs, and Ts in a digital string, and we call that a gene. And if you have a section of DNA for building a protein, that's great, it all works. Now, but if you want to build a fundamentally new form of life, you got to have new proteins to service the new cell types to build the new anatomical structures. In our computer world, we know that if you start randomly changing the zeros and ones in a section of digital code, you're going to degrade the function of that code long before you come up with a new string for making a new program or operating system. The functional sequences they're highly isolated in what's called sequence space. You can change a few things and still retain function, but after a very few number of changes, you're going to degrade the function, and long before you come up with a new function. Now, the Darwinian mechanism starts with the idea that there are random changes in those digital bit strings, those sequences of A's, G's, and T's. And based on our experience in the computer world, we would expect that random changes are going to, again, degrade those strings long before they're capable of building a new protein. And there's now very compelling experimental evidence that that's true.
All right, so that was just a little taste of Dr. Meyer. I highly recommend, if you are the kind of person, if you watched that video and you were like, oh, that's interesting, go read his book, Darwin's Doubt. Highly recommended. Maybe if I know some of you maybe listened to that video and thought, wow, this is long, and he's saying a lot of words that I don't know what he's talking about. So if that's you, that's okay too. That's okay too. But suffice it to say, there are many people like Dr. Meyer who think, and I think this as well, that the theory of evolution does not explain where different species came from. And it actually can't. That explanation has to come from a different source. So that's a powerful thing to think about. So that's our little piece on creation science in the Bible for our time today. And now we're going to jump back into where we're at in the story of Genesis. Okay? So we've been talking about, remember, that's where it began. Genesis began with the creation of the world, and then human beings, everything was perfect. We turned away from God. And then things got spiraled out of control. There was a flood. The whole world got destroyed. Right after the flood, hopefully we would do better. No, we didn't. We just kept doing the same bad stuff. The world spirals out of control again. And God's big plan for how to fix the entire world, right? This is what all human beings have, since the beginning of history, have been trying to fix what's broken in the world. And God's big plan is, I'm going to choose this one dysfunctional family. I'm going to choose this one family. His plan is to pick a family a lot like your family, a lot like my family, and just work with them for a really long time. And he's going to use this family to bless and restore the whole world. What? That's his plan? Yeah, that's his plan. Yeah. His thoughts are different than our thoughts. It's not how we would do it. We would form a totalitarian government and make everyone do the right thing. That's not what God does. Okay? So Genesis is a lot like the Wild West. We got to keep in mind today, Abraham, who was called to go out west into Canaan. Canaan was quite literally the Badlands, the cursed land. And it was full of little warlords fighting with each other. And, so you got out to the Wild West, Abraham, and we talked about him. We went through his life for a couple of weeks. That's what we've been working on. We're in this chosen family part of the story. And now today we're moving on from Abraham into the life of Isaac and then the early life of Jacob. So we're going to talk today about Isaac and then about Jacob and Esau. And we're not going to talk about Isaac for a long time because there's really not a whole lot in Genesis about Isaac. There's some. We already talked about, there's some when he's a kid, right? Because his dad, Abraham, his dad had been asked by God to sacrifice him. Now, that wasn't really what he was going to allow to happen, but this was a test of Abraham's faith. We talked about that last week as progress in Abraham. What God was doing in Abraham's whole life. So throughout this, you got to keep in mind, you got Abraham, we're going to think of him now as grandpa, okay? And Isaac, we're going to think of as dad. And we're going to talk a lot about Jacob and Esau today, which are the two kids. We're going to talk about their growing up experience. So you got to think of those generations of the family. And this is how Genesis talks about it too. Over and over again, Genesis says, these are the generations. These are the generations of Abraham, of Isaac, of Jacob, of Esau. So as we're thinking about that family, we got to think about how that family relates, how they relate to each other. And how they're the same, what similarities there are, but also what big differences there are. So Abraham, his life, we have his life in some detail. Abraham was the one who left home originally. And we talked about the progress in his life, right? So he was asked to sacrifice Isaac, and by the end of his life, he had reached the point where his faith was strong enough that when something really bad came into his life, he could stare it down, Abraham, and he could say, even though God has allowed that to happen, I know he's going to do something good with it. Abraham's life was like this, up and down and terrified, and then trusting God, and then terrified again. But by the end, we see the progress that God has made in him. And we said last week, that's the point. That's what God's trying to do with his whole life, is build faith in Abraham. What would your life be like if you could do that? If the next time some really scary or some really bad thing comes into your life, you could stare it right in the eye, whatever that bad thing is, and you could say, I trust God anyway. I trust that God is going to use even that thing to do amazing things through my life. That thing's not good, but God's going to use it because he's good. If that were your immediate response to every hardship in life, that'd be heaven on earth. You'd already be living in the kingdom of God. So Isaac's life, it's funny, that's my name, right? Pastor Isaac. I don't identify with Isaac very much. Isaac is very different from me in a lot of ways. I identify more actually with Abraham. I think out of all of them, I think he's the one, personality-wise, I think I identify most with Abraham. Isaac is very much following in his dad's footsteps. So a lot of his life is just about doing what his parents had started. So his mom and dad, right, Sarah and Abraham, they had left Ur of the Chaldeans and then left Haran, this other region, gone out into the wilderness to follow after God who had called them, right? And there's all these stories, all these crucial identity-forming stories that happen during Abraham's life. And Isaac just basically does the same thing. I'm just going to keep wandering around the wilderness like Dad did. I'm going to keep following this call. God eventually is going to build us into this great nation. That's what I know. When his mom dies, Isaac is very closely bonded with his parents. That's clear in the text. When his mother dies, he is devastated. And actually, I think in some ways he never gets over his mom dying. So I've known people who kind of have more of this personality type than I do. And so you can kind of see that in this family. You've probably known people like this as well. So there's a big story where his dad actually sends to get him a wife. So Isaac's wife will be Rebekah. And he sends to get Rebekah back from the land where they came from originally, back in the north, in Haran. And when he finally meets Rebekah and he's able to marry her, this comforts him because of the loss of his mother. That's how he thinks of it. There's this amazing scene. This is a famous painting of the servant. This is Abraham's servant going to find Rebekah. And you have another, it's really an amazing moment of faith for her, I think, too, because she's going to leave. This painting is old. It's from 1775. That's a while ago. I don't really love the style of this painting, but it does show very well, I think, the difference. Rebekah, once again, is a person who's from the city. And when Abraham sends his servant to find a wife for his son Isaac, Rebekah is being asked to leave like a really nice place and go live in tents in the wilderness with, some wild guys. Interesting. But she does it. It's an act of faith on her part. She believes that the Lord is calling her to do this. So there's some good stuff there. This is the text, the moment when Isaac first sees her, and this is my favorite text from Isaac's life. Now, Isaac had come from Beer Lahai Roi, for he was living in the Negev. This is in the south of what we would think of as Israel today, near the Dead Sea. He went out to the field one evening to meditate. And I love that verse. It's actually, there's a translation issue here, to meditate, probably to pray, just to think, to muse in the field. He would go out and just hang out in the open country. Isaac was a man of the wilderness. He was a man of the open field. Now think about it. Abraham grew up in the city and moved out into the Badlands. Isaac always lived in the Badlands. He grew up in this cursed land of Canaan, in the Wild West. That's where he's from, and that's what he likes. I mean, you could think of Abraham kind of like a cowboy. He goes out into the field to meditate, and as he looked up, he saw camels approaching. Now there's actually camels in the narrative. As you go through Genesis, there's more and more camels. And actually, camels were entering into the history of the Middle East at this time. Interesting fact. Rebekah also looked up and saw Isaac, so she's coming for the first time. She got down from her camel and asked the servant, "Who is that man in the field coming to meet us? Who's that wild man? Who is that cowboy? Is he dangerous?" Turns out it's going to be her husband. "He is my master," the servant answered. So she took her veil and covered herself, because they're not yet married. Then the servant told Isaac all he had done. Isaac brought her into the tent of his mother Sarah, and he married Rebekah. So she became his wife, and he loved her. That's the most emotional section of all of Isaac's life in Genesis right there. He did love Rebekah. You're going to see in a minute that their marriage is rough. Their marriage is rough. He doesn't really talk to her, and she manipulates him. That's going to be the main thing that happens in their marriage. But they did love each other. At least he loved her. I don't know. Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. So just remembering a few things, Abraham, the progression of the dream here, the vision that God has given them, this is the first thing you can write down. Remember that Abraham, his relationship with the Lord was his only hope. He had taken this huge leap of faith. And in order just to survive, he's like crying out to God almost constantly, I think. Help me, help me. People are going to kill me. I don't know how to live in this place. Abraham's relationship with God was at the very center of his life because he had no other hope. Isaac is different. Isaac, you don't see the depth of relationship between Isaac and the Lord. There is some, but in a lot of ways, and you see this in the church. You've seen people like this in your life, where one generation in a family, somebody comes to faith in a dramatic way. The next generation grew up in church, maybe. And maybe they don't, they're doing it seems like maybe partly because it was just their parents' faith. You see this in people today, and this is what's happening in this family. Isaac does have a relationship with the Lord, but mostly he's comfortable in his life. He's used to being in the Wild West. He likes it. He does listen to God. There's one moment in his life where the Lord actually speaks to him because there's a famine. He's tempted to go down to Egypt. Isaac does the same thing as his father Abraham had done, where his wife Rebekah is really pretty, and he's around some crazy warlord, this time Abimelech, and he's afraid they're going to kill him and steal his beautiful wife. And so he pretends she's his sister, just like his dad did. So he's following the same positive steps that his father had, but he's also following some of the same patterns of sin or fear, doubt that his father had. He follows God's plan, but he has little relationship with God. It's limited, in the second generation. So now we'll jump from there because there's really not a whole lot else that happens in Isaac's life. A couple of things, but we'll jump into Jacob and Esau, who are the children here of Isaac and Rebekah. Okay, so for a little while, they're unable to have a family. For about 20 years, they're unable to have children, and then there are Jacob and Esau. So let's read this beginning of this account. So I told you, Genesis says this over and over again. These are the generations. You're looking at a whole family line so that we can learn things from a family's history and how they related to God over time. This is important for us. This is where it says it. In the Hebrew text, these are the generations of Isaac, Abraham's son. This is the account of the family line of Abraham's son Isaac. Abraham became the father of Isaac. And Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebekah, the daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean from Paddan Aram, and sister of Laban, the Aramean. This is going to be important later because Jacob is going to end up working for his uncle, Laban. That's going to be important later when we get to the rest of the story in a few weeks. Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was childless. So he does have some relationship with the Lord. The Lord answered his prayer, and his wife Rebekah became pregnant. The babies jostled within her. They jostled each other within her. I think this is a very nice, euphemistic way to say it. And she said, "Why is this happening to me?" So she went to inquire of the Lord. So what's happening here? Rebekah is pregnant with twins, and she is, I think, in pain. Something's going on between these two twins inside of her womb. They are fighting with each other in the womb. Now, we've seen this fighting between brothers before in Genesis, right? Where did we see it? Cain and Abel. Yep, the very first brothers in the history of the world. One kills the other. But here again, we have, in particular, these two are fighting in the womb. So she goes to inquire of the Lord. She goes to ask God, what's up with this? Why is this happening to me? And the Lord says to her, 2 nations are in your womb. 2 peoples from within you will be separated. One people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger. So actually, while she's pregnant, Rebekah, maybe in prayer, she receives a kind of prophecy or vision or word from God that says the younger son or the younger child within you is actually going to be the ruler. Interesting. When the time came for her to give birth, there were twin boys in her womb. The first to come out was red, and his whole body was like a hairy garment. So they named him Esau. What do you think Esau means in Hebrew? It means hairy. Exactly like our name Harry in English, right? This means hairy. And Isaac and Rebekah, I think it's Isaac's fault, because I think it seems to me Rebekah would have been way more creative. Isaac is just not very creative in how he names his kids. He doesn't name them, a name of my ancestors or a name devoted to the Lord. You see how this is kind of his relationship with God is being watered down. And Isaac is a very straightforward, practical person. His kid is super hairy. So what does he name him? Harry. Guess what? He also had a nickname. His nickname was Edom. Guess what Edom means? Look at the text. Guess what it means? It means red. He called him two things, hairy and red, because he was hairy and red. Now, we don't know exactly what this means. We know that he had a lot of hair. He probably had some sort of disorder. There's actually a medical disorder where you just grow tons of hair, almost like a wolf man or something. Really. So he probably had that. But what we don't know is when it says he was red, it could mean that he just had tons of hair all over his body, but his skin was also very red when he first came out. Or it could mean that the hair was actually red, that he was a redhead, and the hair that he grew was red. Now, you might think that's only sort of like the Irish or something. No, actually, there were people in the Middle East in this time frame who had red hair. Not very many, but some. Interesting. After this, his brother came out. So here comes Jacob, with his hand grasping Esau's heel. So when he comes out of the womb, he is grabbing his brother's foot. They've still been fighting already in the womb during the birth process. And he was named Jacob. Now, I told you, Isaac is not very creative. Who knows what Jacob means? It means the one who grabs his brother's heel. So that's the thing. And figuratively, it also means the one who causes his brother to stumble. The one who trips his brother, who makes him fall. It's not a good name. It's not a nice thing. Thanks, Dad. You named me the heel grabber? Okay. Isaac was 60 years old when Rebekah gave birth to them. So there's the 20 years that they had tried to have children for. Okay? The boys grew up, and Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the open country, while Jacob was content to stay at home among the tents. Now notice this, okay? Because you're about to see something in the next verse. So what's happening in the generations? Remember, Isaac has grown up in the wilderness. He's grown up in the Wild West. He's a man of the field. He likes the outdoor stuff. He doesn't talk much. He's very straightforward, very practical. Isaac is kind of a mountain man. And Esau is even more of a mountain man than his dad. Now, Rebekah, where's she from? She's from the big city, right? She grew up not in these tents, in these smelly, stinky tents out in the wilderness. She grew up in actual buildings, actual houses. Jacob likes to stay at home among the tents. And look what happens. Isaac, who had a taste for wild game, he doesn't even like. So he's raising sheep and goats. That's their main job. He doesn't like to eat the sheep and the goats. He likes wild game caught fresh from the field. Isaac, who had a taste for wild game, loved Esau, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Now look at this family. This family is super dysfunctional. This is not something that the Bible is saying, parents, do this. Mom loves one kid and doesn't really care about the other. Dad loves the other kid and doesn't care about the first one. This is terrible. What happens to a family when this is the case? All kinds of bad stuff. This is, in a lot of ways, it's not the definition of a dysfunctional family, but it's one way that family dysfunction looks. One parent favors one kid, the other parent favors the other, and the kids fight all the time. And then when that grows up, it becomes all kind of bad stuff. But it all has to do with who they are and where they're from and the future. All right. So then you got these couple of stories, okay? So the first one is this, the birthright for some stew. And a lot of you will know these stories, so I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time. We're not going to read all of them. They're quite long in the text. We'll sort of read some key verses because there's the story where Jacob steals from his brother the birthright. And then there's the story where he steals, what's the second thing he steals from his brother Esau? The blessing of his father Isaac. And these are two related but separate things that Jacob steals. Now remember, he's the schemer. He's the one who causes his brother to stumble. Look at this family. Once when Jacob was cooking some stew, so Jacob's at home. He likes to do the stuff with mom, right? That's who likes him. And he's at home building the nation, building the family in this way. Esau came in from the open country, famished. Esau's been out hunting, maybe for a week, who knows? We got maybe one or two hunters in here, I don't know. You probably bring some food with you, but Esau didn't. He thought he was going to get food, and he didn't. He said to Jacob, quick, let me have some of that red stew. I'm famished. And then there's this little footnote. That's why he was also called Edom. Notice the stew is red, kind of like his nickname. I don't know what it has to do. Interesting note in the text, interesting connection. And Jacob replies, okay, bro, first sell me your birthright. What's the birthright? In their culture, what we think, we don't actually know for sure, but we think that what happened is the firstborn son, which is Esau, not Jacob, because Esau came out first. The firstborn son would get a double portion of the inheritance. So basically, with just two kids, the way it would work out with just two boys, it would work out that Esau would get 2/3 of the inheritance, so 2/3 of the sheep and the goats and the slaves and whatever else they had, and Jacob would get 1/3. Esau says, you make a deal with me right now, we flip it. I get the 2/3, you get the 1/3. Could you imagine saying that to your brother? Sign this contract. Sign this contract that when mom and dad die, I get the house, and then I'll give you this piece of pizza. And Esau, here's what he does. Esau, this is his reasoning. Look, I'm about to die. I am so hungry, I'm about to die. Is Esau really about to die? If he were so hungry that he were literally about to die, he would probably not have been able to get himself home. He just is really, really hungry, and he's thinking about, have you ever been that hungry that like you were hangry, you were mad at everybody else around you, everybody was going to get out of your way because the only thing that's important right now is getting that piece of pizza or whatever it is, right? Your stew. Give me that stew. The women of Hope made some stew. I got some stew in my fridge right now. Actually, I'm out of here. I'm going to get some stew. No, okay. Maybe you've been in that position before. You felt like you were that hungry. So he reasons, I'm about to die. What good is the birthright to me? So he says, sure. Jacob says, swear it to me first. In their culture, this is like passing him a contract and saying, sign this contract. Swear it to me first. So Esau swears an oath in their kitchen that he's going to give his birthright to Jacob for this bowl of stew. Then Jacob gave Esau some bread and some lentil stew. It didn't even have any meat in it. Come on. He ate and drank, and then he got up and left. So Esau despised his birthright. Now, we need to pull an important lesson out of this. You might be thinking, what is this about? Like, why does the Bible tell me this? Okay? This is an important lesson about what's going on in Esau. Esau has no desire beyond this present life. He has no desire beyond this present life. What we see in Abraham, Grandpa, is living for the Lord, okay? He is actually willing to risk his life to do what God has called him to do. Dad, Isaac, he's kind of living for both. He likes living in the Wild West. The Lord is there. Esau, we don't see any indication that he has a relationship with the Lord at all. All we see is he likes meat, he likes stew, he likes to be out in the field hunting. He's a cowboy, and that's all he is. Later in the Bible, in the book of James, we are told that because of this fact, we are told that Esau is godless. What does it mean to be godless? Is Esau doing a whole bunch of awful stuff? Is he a murderer? Or not really. He's not doing a whole bunch of awful stuff. What it means to be godless is God is not present in your life. You don't ever think about him. When you make decisions, God's not part of your decisions. That's all it means. But the Bible holds this up as one of the most horrible things you can be, is godless. How often do you think about God in your regular life? Don't answer. Think in your own mind. How often? When you make decisions, is God part of the decision? Do you think about him? Or is it just about, I need to get that next bowl of stew, or I need to achieve this thing in my life? To what degree are you godless? This is the problem with Esau. He has no desire beyond this present life. It's all about what he sees, all about what he can get right now. All right, stealing the blessing. So the second big story happens at the end of their lives, okay? And this is, not the end of their lives, the end of Isaac's life. So Isaac is super old now, and he's pretty much blind at this point. And what happens in their culture at the end of life is the old men, there'd be a moment where they would bless the next generation. We see this over and over again. We're going to see some details of that blessing here in just a minute. We'll talk about what a blessing is. But this has to do with the promise. It has to do with what God has called them to do. God has called them to go into Canaan, this Badlands, build a new nation that's going to be a blessing to the whole world. So Isaac is going to pass that on to someone. It's a spiritual act. And who does Isaac want to pass the torch to? Esau. The good one, right? The cowboy, the mountain man, the man's man with hair on his chest. That's who Isaac wants to pass the blessing on to. Not this smooth-skinned Jacob, no way. Who talks too much. Jacob talks a lot too. Isaac, I think, hates that. Rebekah loves it. When Isaac was old and his eyes were so weak that he could no longer see, he called for Esau, his older son, and said to him, "My son." "Here I am," Esau answered. Isaac said, "I am now an old man, and I don't know the day of my death. So now then, go get your equipment, go get your bow and your arrows, and go out into the open country and hunt some wild game for me. Go get me a gazelle. Prepare me the kind of tasty food that I like. Give me a big hunk of roasted meat so that I may give you my blessing before I die." Now, just for a minute here, think about what this is. This is what it is Isaac is going to, in the knowledge that he carries a blessing from his father, and that blessing comes from the Lord as well. He is going to stir himself up till he's in a really good mood. He's going to eat the thing that he loves and remember all the great things about his son. And then from the depths of his soul, he is going to say, "Esau, I bless you." That's what a blessing is. And there is a spiritual reality that goes with it. It's about all we can spend the time on blessing today, but just know that. Now, Rebekah was listening. Rebekah was listening? Why was she listening? She's like at the door of the tent or something like this. What's she doing? As Isaac spoke to his son Esau. And when Esau left for the open country to hunt the game and bring it back, Rebekah said to her son Jacob, "I just overheard a conversation between your dad and your brother. Your dad is about to give your brother the blessing. He said, 'Bring me some game and prepare some tasty food so that I may eat and give you my blessing in the presence of Yahweh, in the presence of the Lord, before I die. Now, my son, Jacob, listen to me and do what I tell you to do.'" I've got a plan. The whole stealing of the blessing isn't even Jacob's idea. It's his mom's idea. They are schemers together, and they've been scheming for a long time. I think actually they're probably smarter than Isaac and Esau are as well. You see, I think that's the subtext here. "Go out to the flock and bring me 2 choice young goats." Why goats? Goats taste the most like wild game. How many of you here like to eat goat? Probably not too many. My wife hates it. "So I can prepare some tasty food for your father just the way he likes it. I can make it taste like it's wild game from the field. Take it to your father to eat so that he may give you his blessing before he dies." This is a famous painting of this moment We won't go through the rest of the story. We won't read through it, but many of you know it. So they bring the tasty food. He puts goat skins on his hands. That's what these gloves are representing here. Because Jacob's skin is smooth. He puts goat skins on his hands, makes himself smell like he's been out in the woods. And he comes into his dad and he says, "I'm Esau." And his dad says, "Why does your voice sound like Jacob? Let me feel your hands." "Oh, are you?" His dad says to him, "Are you really my son Esau?" Isaac was maybe not very smart at this point. And he smells the food. And as soon as he smells the food, he says, "You are my son Esau." And he blesses him. He blesses Jacob. Esau comes back, and Esau is super mad. Check this out. Esau comes back. The verse right before this, Esau comes back, and he says, "That's it. I'm the mountain man. I'm the cowboy. My brother is a wimp anyway. I'm going to kill him. As soon as my dad's dead, so's my brother. I'm going to murder him." When Rebekah was told what her older son Esau had said, she sent for her younger son Jacob and said to him, "Your brother Esau is planning to avenge himself by killing you. Now then, my son, do what I say. Flee. Run away. Go back to my brother, your uncle, back in the city in Haran, and stay with him until your brother's fury subsides. When your brother's no longer angry with you and forgets what you did to him, I'll send word to you and you can come back, because otherwise I'm going to lose both of you in a single day." I don't know how she would lose Esau. Rebekah actually, you'll see this and the next thing she says, she was a manipulator. She's even trying to manipulate, I think, Jacob here in some ways. Then Rebekah said to Isaac, "I'm disgusted with living because of these Hittite women." So her son Esau had married a Hittite woman. "If Jacob takes a wife from among the women of this land, from the Hittite women like these, my life will not be worth living." She says this only to manipulate her husband and get him to send Jacob away. This is how she dealt with him. This is how she related to him. The final thing we're going to look at today, Jacob, schemer. What's Jacob's relationship with God up to this point? He's got no relationship with God either. It seems like the dream of Abraham is about to die. The call that God had put on Abraham's life, go and I'm going to build this big nation. Isaac had half of it, and now Jacob and Esau, neither of them have the vision. Neither of them really know the Lord at all. Esau doesn't care about God, and Jacob has the drive. He's trying to build things for himself, but he's trying to do it all in his own power. He's trying to manipulate people and talk to people. He's almost like a con man. We're going to see that the next time we get to the second half of Jacob's life. He's a con artist in a lot of ways. What does that have to do with God? Jacob left Beersheba and he set out for Haran. And when he had reached a certain place, he stopped for the night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones that was there, he put it under his head and lay down to sleep. How many of you have done that? You ever slept on a rock? These guys were rough. I'm telling you, these were cowboys of the wilderness. He slept on a rock. He had a dream in which he saw a stairway resting on the earth with its top reaching to heaven. And the angels of God were going up and down on the stairway. And above the stairway stood Yahweh, the Lord. He's never had any interaction with Yahweh. This is just something he heard his dad talk about. All of a sudden, he sees a vision of the Lord. "I am the Lord, Yahweh, the God of your father Abraham," grandfather, it just means father in a certain sense, "and the God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are lying. Your descendants will be so many, they'll be like the dust of the earth, and you'll spread out to the east and the west, the north and the south. All peoples on the earth will be blessed through you and your offspring." The Lord says to Jacob, "I'm going to use you. Even though you're a schemer and a liar, I'm going to use you in this same vision. I'm going to use you to do what I said I would do through Abraham's descendants. I am with you, and I will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I promised you." Now, part of this, especially this last verse, God is going to pursue Jacob, even though Jacob hasn't been looking for God at all. God is saying, I am going to follow you around in your life, Jacob. You're not going to be able to get away from me. Jacob doesn't really understand that at first. Jacob responds like this. He wakes up from his sleep and he says, this is my favorite line in this whole section of Genesis. Surely Yahweh is in this place, and I didn't even know it. This is us almost every day. The Lord God, the Lord Jesus Christ, the Holy Spirit of God is with you in your kitchen, in your workplace, in your garage, when you're driving down the street, and we are most often not aware of it at all. It's a famous painting of Jacob's dream. I don't have time for that right now. Jacob gets the whole idea wrong, though. Here's what Jacob says. The Lord is here, and I didn't even realize it. This must be a special place. It must be that this is where God lives, this place where I just slept on a rock. He doesn't realize that God has been following him around. He thinks that he stumbled into like a special place where Yahweh lives. And he says, this is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven. Nope. You lost it, Jacob. You just lost the whole. Early the next morning, he takes the stone that he had slept on and he sets it up as a pillar. He makes like a little altar out of the stone that he had slept on. And he called the place Bethel. Bethel means the house of God, even though the city used to be called Luz. Jacob made a vow saying, if God will be with me and will watch over me on this journey that I am taking, I will give and will give me food to eat and clothes to wear, so that I may return safely to my father's household. Then the Lord will be my God, and this stone that I have set up as a pillar will be God's house. And of all that you give me, I will give you a tenth. Jacob does what many of us did, even as little kids. I know I did this. His response to the Lord is this: if God will do great things for me, then I'll follow him. He has completely misunderstood what God is saying to him. What God has said to him is, Jacob, I am going to follow you around, and I am going to make sure that you become the person you were supposed to be, and I am going to achieve amazing things through your life. And Jacob's response is, hey, I might choose to follow you. Maybe. I'm the one in charge. If you can do amazing things for me, then I'll follow you. He tries to make a deal. He's going to try and con God. We're going to take a break after this message. We're going to go into an Easter series for 3 weeks. We're going to talk about what our lives are like as we wrestle with God. And this is what's going to happen in the rest of Jacob's life. After that Easter series, we're going to come back and see that Jacob, his name actually gets changed later to Israel, which means the man who wrestled with God. Really, I think it's more accurate to say God wrestles with him. God is pursuing Jacob to make him into what he's supposed to be, just like he's pursuing you and me and making us into the people that we were made to be. Let's pray. We'll continue in worship.